stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Now, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker of the hour. Now, when our General Counsel, Brad Berry, asked me if I'd be interested in the assignment, I tried to play it cool, but I jumped at the opportunity. I immediately began the research on this fearless woman we know and the world knows as Stacey Abrams. Besides contributing to her campaign, like many of you, and after reading her book, Lead from the Outside, like many of you, I felt like I've known Stacey my entire life. Although this is my first time actually meeting her, when I see her, I see in her my sister in this movement. Our speaker, Stacey Abrams, is a Black woman, daughter, sister, lawyer, and activist who has become one of the most thought-provoking and prolific voices of our modern-day civil rights movement. I personally reached out to some of my great friends, and one in particular, Melissa Bishop Murphy from Georgia, who described Stacey as a trailblazer, strategic thinker, courageous leader. But we know all the facts. Ms. Abrams was the first African-American woman to run for governor of Georgia, turning out more voters than any Democrat in Georgia history, including former President Barack Obama. She is the first African-American woman to be minority leader of the Georgia House of Representatives, and she's one of the youngest people ever appointed deputy city attorney for the city of Atlanta at the age of 29. But this fearless phenom is more than that. She is a power broker who has worked across the aisle to get things done, never allowing political differences to hinder the progress of her main goal, and that was helping the people who mattered most to her. She is an entrepreneur, co-founding and serving as the Senior Vice President of Now Corp, a financial services firm. She co-founded Nourish Inc., a beverage company with a focus on infant and toddlers, and is CEO of SageWorks, a legal consulting firm representing clients including the WNBA's Atlanta Dream. To my surprise, she's also an award-winning author of several romantic suspense novels. But most importantly, Stacey Abrams is a visionary. Registering voters in Georgia through the New Georgia Project led to the submission of 200,000 new voter registrations, making Georgia competitive as a purple state for future political races. After witnessing the gross mismanagement of the election by the Secretary of State's office, she continues to fight for fair elections through her new organization, fairfight.org. This will ensure every Georgian has a voice in our election system. NAACP, please stand to your feet. Stand to your feet and welcome the real governor of the state of Georgia, one of Spelman's finest, Stacey Abrams.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you to Chairman Russell. I'm sorry I broke your rules. We're trying to do it as fast as possible out of the way. Thank you to President Jackson for continuing to be my friend. But will you all join me in saying thank you to people who often go unrecognized for their service? Please help me thank the servers who are feeding us today. And I certainly want to acknowledge the president of the Georgia State Conference, Phyllis Blake. Later this afternoon, I will have an opportunity to spend more time with the family of Judge Damon Keith. My younger sister Leslie in 2014 became the first Black woman to serve as a federal district court judge in the state of Mississippi. And she did so standing in the shadow and on the shoulders of Damon Keith. So thank you to the Keith family for everything your family has done. So now I'm going to tell you a little story. In 1993, I was just minding my own business, and I met two men. Benjamin Todd Jellis, who had just recently been kicked out of Columbia University for rabble-rousing and organizing and trying to defend the rights of the dispossessed, and Derrick Jackson, a rabble-rousing activist in Mississippi. We came together in Jackson because there had been a governor elected in the state of Mississippi who had organized his life around the dismantling of affirmative action programs. He believed that race-based programs were inherently wrong because he didn't like who was being served. He had faced a lawsuit for several years that compelled him as governor to fully fund historically Black colleges at the same rate as historically white institutions. Well, he didn't like the decision, and so his counter argument was that, well, instead of funding Mississippi Valley State, as he was instructed to do by the courts, he would just cut out the school-to-prison pipeline's intercession through Mississippi Valley State and just turn the college itself into a prison. In 1993, this wasn't a national story. It was Mississippi, and to a lot of folks, it just seemed like a logical decision. But these two young men that I met while I was at Spelman College, the three of us decided that we would stand in the history that we had grown up knowing, a history that Ben had learned in California, a history that Derrick and I had learned in Mississippi, a history that had been written by the NAACP. And that history was, when you fight, you can win. And so we organized a march in Jackson, and we got students from across the country and around our state to stand up and demand that the governor not go through with his plan, that the legislature do its job and fully fund our colleges, that we erase the notion that the only likely outcome for Black existence is prison and imprisonment. And we won. He turned away from his intent, and our march led to action, and Mississippi Valley State continues to serve to this day. I tell this story because when Ben and Derrick and I started plotting, I wasn't convinced. I grew up in Mississippi. I grew up in Gulfport, so we had a little bit of progress there, but I'd heard about Valley, and I'd seen Kirk Fordyce. And I was convinced that he was going to win, that the change that was sweeping Mississippi, the conservatism that had taken off its shroud and was standing proud, I was convinced that that behavior was going to win. But I was raised by Robert and Carolyn Abrams, natives of Hattiesburg, Mississippi. My mother and father had both been activists in the civil rights movement. My mother had done the work of helping register voters, despite it being illegal in the state. My father went a step further and got himself arrested. He likes to say it was because he was so aggressive. We like to say it's because my mom was just better at it. But my father, at the age of 15 or 16, found himself in jail for trying to pursue a right that he would not possess for years if he was successful. But what my parents wanted us to understand when they tell us the stories of their time in the civil rights movement is that you don't fight in case you win. You fight because you will win. Now, the reality is victory doesn't come always in the morning. Sometimes it's years and years in the making. And if you look at the legacy of Damon Keith, sometimes it's decades in the offing. But we are guaranteed to lose if we do not fight. We are guaranteed to be vanquished if we concede too early. And that is why in November of 2018, when I stood to be the first African-American woman to ever govern a state in the history of the United States of America, when I stood at that podium after 10 days of lawsuits and phone calls and hand-wringing and prayer, I decided that I wasn't going to fight any longer for me to become governor of Georgia. And there were those who said, well, why not contest the election? Why not fight a little longer? It was because I knew the laws of Georgia. And I knew that if I fought for me to become governor, I would be conceding a larger fight. Because this never was about me winning an election. It was about transforming the electorate so that everyone in Georgia understood their power. And on November 16th, when I stood at the podium to tell the people of Georgia that I would not contest the election, when I legally acknowledged the sufficiency of votes to make Brian Kemp the governor, I also said I will not concede the election. And that act of defiance caused many to wring their hands and gnash their teeth and say, well, she's done. Because in our world, we have been taught that the only way to continue is to condone the bad actions of others. That if you want to keep your place at the table, you can't upset the silverware. But you see, I was raised in Mississippi and I came of age in Georgia, and I know better. I am a daughter of the South, a place that has fought against its legacy for its entire existence. And what I knew was that the election of 2018 was not about me. I may have gotten the accolades and the press coverage, but the election was about the millions of Georgians who didn't believe their voices mattered. The tens of thousands who had stayed home election after election because things never got better for their community. The ones who tried to vote the Quitman 10 and found themselves taken to jail because they were successful in actually changing the composition of a school board. The black men who were followed home in Hancock County because too many of them voted in 2014, and then Secretary of State Brian Kemp decided that they should be followed home to prove they lived where they said they did. I lived in a state where we were transforming before our eyes, and that transformation was terrifying some folks. Because when a Korean community decided that they would register their newly naturalized citizens, they found their offices raided by that Secretary of State. When Latinos who had the right to vote in the state of Georgia decided to exercise that right, they found themselves under investigation by that Secretary of State. I lived in a state that challenged the very right to vote. And on November 16th, I had an opportunity to either declare that I was going to fight for me, or I could declare I was going to fight for right. And my responsibility was to say we would fight for right first by acknowledging that what happened was wrong. And let's be clear, I know I'm not the governor of Georgia, but I do know I am a U.S. citizen who has the right to vote in the state of Georgia. I know that through the New Georgia Project, in partnership with the NAACP, we fought to get thousands of people on the rolls who were told they weren't right enough to be counted in the state. And what we knew by November 16th was that we had transformed the electorate of Georgia. It's why I like to say we won. Because victory isn't just about getting an office. Victory is about tripling the Latino turnout in the state of Georgia in 2018. Victory is about tripling the Asian Pacific Islander turnout in the state of Georgia in 2018. It's about increasing the youth participation rate by 139%. But victory was also about dispelling a myth that is told about our people time and again, that black people have maxed out their promise and maxed out their purpose. We were told that we'd hit the ceiling of black participation in Georgia because Obama ran and, well, that was it. I love President Obama. I voted for him every time he stood. But I know how many black people live in Georgia. I know how many black people live in Georgia who deserve access to education, access to health care, access to economic security, and I knew that they were waiting for one more opportunity to make their voices heard. And so in our campaign, we focused on centering communities of color. I didn't shy away from talking about my experience with the criminal justice system because I have a younger brother who suffers from drug addiction and mental health challenges. I didn't shy away from talking about personal debt because we've got to make choices. You've never seen somebody who can spend money better than a poor person. I knew that we had to talk about affordable housing challenges and crises, not just in Atlanta, but down in Fort Valley. And I knew that African American voters had been discounted and dispossessed and ignored for too long. And on November the 6th, 2018, we proved something. In 2014, 1.1 million Democrats had cast their votes, and I know this is a nonpartisan organization. I do not suffer from that problem. $1.1 million Democrats cast their ballot in the 2014 election in Georgia. But in 2018, because we went everywhere and talked to everyone, because we believed in the capacity of every voter to lift up their voices, 1.2 million African Americans voted for me. But this isn't about partisanship, and it's not even about color. Because you see, Dr. Cole, the woman who taught me about diversity, and hey, JD, you see, we're taught that you could only win people of color, you can only turn out African Americans by losing white voters. But we didn't believe that was true because I don't abide by partisanship, I live by peopleship. And I believe that people want better. They want opportunity. And they want to know you will fight for them. And so on that day when I decided not to concede, I was looking at the fact that not only had we increased Latino and Asian Pacific Islander and Black turnout, we increased the white vote in Georgia for Democrats for the first time in 30 years. And as Garland Gilchrist can tell you, there are folks who will show up if you show them the way. As Bobby Scott has lived a lifetime of proof. If you talk to people like you trust them, they will show up and show you who they are. As Brenda Lawrence can tell you, don't count anyone out. Count on them and they won't disappoint you. And as Rashida Tlaib can tell you, you stand in your truth and people will tell it with you. That is what we're here to do. That is what's at stake in 2020. You see, I refuse to concede my election because you can't condone a system that is broken. You can't say it is true and right and proper to strip people from the right to vote, to deny their registration, to purge 1.4 million of them. It's not right to tell them that their polling places are closed because you're too cheap to keep it open. You can't tell them that a 4-hour line is a okay thing when you've got shift workers making $5.15 an hour in the state of Georgia because that's our minimum wage. You can't impose a poll tax and tell me in 2019 that it's okay. Voter registration, ballot access, and ballot counting, those are truths that we know to be part of the litany and the legacy and the taxonomy of voter suppression. And I'm here to tell you that when we fight at NAACP, we will win. When we fight voter suppression, we will win. But we've got to call it out. And you can't call something out when you've become part of it. Now, for all of you clapping for that statement, I'm going to challenge you a little bit. Because some of you have said that people don't vote because they're apathetic. Some of you have bought into the narrative that folks stay home because they're too lazy to go outside. But we've got to remember, the right to vote is grounded in the opportunity for power. And when you've been told time and again that you are powerless, when you try to exercise that power in the United States of America and you were slapped down by not just laws, but by your neighbors. When they drive past your street, instead of stopping to see if you've gone to vote, if you're registered. When they speed past that signal that will lead you to the wrong side of town, they hope that the light stays green. If you've ever been in that car and sped past that part of town, you are complicit. Because things only change when we change them. And we can't change things we refuse to see. I'm a lifetime member of the NAACP because I believe in its mission. I believe in the legacy of Ida B. Wells, who saw that lynching was a stain and a sin and refused to sit quiet. The W.B. Du Bois saw the possibility and the potential in all of us. The partnership of black and white that created this organization, this mighty organization that for 110 years has spoken truth to power. But the problem is sometimes we're whispering it to each other. Our responsibility in 2020 is to not only speak truth to power, but to wrest it away. Because the power is ours and now is our time. That is why I'm here. You see, we've got this election coming up, and I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I'm not going to tell you which party to choose. But I will tell you that when a hostile power tells you you don't belong here, you might want to listen to what they're trying to tell you. I'm here to say that when they try their best to stop you from doing something, that might mean that if you do it, you win. And I'm here to tell you that voter suppression is real. Not just in Georgia, although we are a singular example, but in Wisconsin and in Texas, in Tennessee and Michigan, in California and New York. Any place we put obstacles in the way to exercising the most fundamental part of democracy, then we're in trouble. And when we concede, when we say it's the user's error, you should have gotten up earlier. You should have used an absentee ballot in a state where they rejected it at a 10% rate in certain counties. You should have had that ID checked, even though you can't get your driver's license fulfilled in North Carolina because you don't have the right piece of paper and it's been 30 days since you asked. When we refuse to acknowledge the complicated nature of suppression, then suppression thrives. And it works because it's insidious, because it's pervasive, and because it's been baked into the DNA of America. From the creation of our country, we have worked to tell people you are not enough and you cannot participate. Because the powers that be know that when we can hold power too, the world changes. When we get counted by the 2020 census, we suddenly become entitled to the resources that flow from DC like manna from heaven. Billions of dollars lost every year because black men go uncounted, because black women go uncounted, because black children go unseen. You want to know why there's a crowded school in your community? It's because those children didn't get counted in the census. You want to know why the roads haven't been fixed in your part of town? It's because the algorithm that allocates the funds ignored you in the last census. And so I'm not just fighting for the right to vote, I'm fighting for the right to count and to be counted. I refuse to be erased from the narrative of America. The citizenship question has been put to bed, but the real question is, are we going to let them erase us from the story of America in 2020? I'm here to tell you, no, we will not. And that's why in the 10 days between Election Day 2018 and my non-concession day, November 16th, I sat Shiva for about 10 days. My last name is Jewish, I am not. But I respect the tradition of sitting in mourning, but also contemplating existence. And as Derek can tell you, I'm not really good at just sitting silently. And as Chelsea Hall, my special advisor, can tell you, I'm pretty good at trying to make up things to do. And as Dr. Cole knows, I don't know how to shut up. And so in the wake of that election, Melanie Campbell, I decided to create two organizations. The first is fairfight.com, because when we fight against voter suppression, when we demand fair elections, we will win. Fair Fight Action has taken action. We have sued the state of Georgia, and we are moving forward, and we will be in court, hopefully on trial date of March 20th, 2020. We are in discovery right now, getting the information we need, because as Judge Terrence Keith can tell you, as Brad Berry can tell you, discovery is an amazing thing. Because sometimes you don't know the questions to ask until you see the information they don't want you to have. To those Kellogg Fellows and the lawyers at Jenner and Block that are working on these issues across the country, we're in a phase of discovery where we're going to finally find out how exact match came to be, despite a 2009 Justice Department opinion that said that exact match was racially discriminatory, and they did it anyway. But we're also in the midst of legislation, talking to cities and counties, telling them that they have power too, that you don't have to wait for the state to realize it's wrong, that you can follow the lead of legislators and leaders like Garland Gilchrist and the folks here in Michigan who said they weren't going to wait for the legislature to change its mind. They were going to put it on the ballot and give same-day registration and automatic registration and the right to vote to as many Michiganders as they could. We can't wait for power to give itself to us. We have to take it where we can. So at Fair Fight, we do litigation, legislation, but we also do advocacy. Because when you stop by those neighborhoods you speed past, when you talk to those folks you're a little afraid of, they aren't going to vote because Martin Luther King died for it. They will vote when you tell them there's something to live for. Because we remember the legacy and we carry it with us, but what he told us, what Mary McLeod Bethune understood, what civil rights leaders have told us for eons, is that it's not enough to do things because of past wrong. You have to do it for future right. And if we want people to stand up and own their power, we've got to talk to them about how power is made real. That when you vote in that school board election, your child gets pencils in their classroom. That when you vote in that state legislative election, they can't strip you of your right to health care. That when you show up in the census, you actually get congressional representation that looks like your state. But we've got to be the truth tellers. We've got to be the ones who point out the way. And so Fair Fight Action uses litigation, legislation, and advocacy. And Fair Count is one of only 2 organizations that we can find in the country whose sole purpose is counting census. Hard to count people, starting in Georgia but moving across this country. Because I will not allow us to not be counted. But I don't want to do this alone. And so when my friend President Jackson asked me to be here, I said yes, because I know that the power in this room can change America. I know that the power in this room understands that immigration reform isn't just about those who are fleeing persecution in Central America, that some of the folks coming through Ecuador come from the continent of Africa, that some of the folks banging on our doors for asylum are persecuted in Asia, and that we are a beacon of freedom and we don't get to turn the lights out because someone doesn't like who sees it. That only changes if we show up in 2020. I'm here because I know the fight for health care is not done, that yes, we want everyone to have access, but some of us are still fighting for the opportunity to talk about access to health care. And that as much as we want change nationally, we've got to keep our eyes focused also on what's happening locally. That criminal justice reform is not just a first step. It is a marathon, and we've got to make this country safe for returning citizens and those who are incarcerated. That we cannot be a nation where the #1 provider of mental health is our prison system. These are solvable problems, and these are our problems. But the power for change is in our hands. And so I'm going to leave you with 3 charges. First, we must plan. Say plan. You are here to talk about what needs to be done, but this isn't rocket science. We need to show up and show out and show them who we are. But that means actually talking about who's going to do the work, who's going to raise the money, who's going to be held accountable. And it's not about infighting about who gets the credit. It's about fighting the enemy, not ourselves. So over the next few days of this conference, I need you to understand and remember not only who you are, but whose you are and why you're here. We have to plan for victory. We can't keep fighting 2008 or 1998 or 1988. We've got to be fighting for 2020 and beyond. So say it with me. We're going to plan. Next, we're going to pursue. Say pursue. Once we've had our fun in the conference, once we've written down our plans, we're not going to forget that we got to do the work when we get back home. Because in states across this country, we have to start putting in place voter protection operations today. We've got to start putting in place voter registration efforts today. We've got to make sure that the census is not just a conversation, but an action plan that we are pursuing, that we're already talking about what's going to happen. That when you leave here not only with a plan, but with a commitment to pursue justice. Say pursue. They are chasing us. We can't let them catch us. But we can chase freedom and we can get it. We can chase power and we can have it. We can pursue our identities and our opportunities together. So number one, we're going to do what? And then we're going to. And if in November 2020 something has gone horribly wrong, we are going to do what we have always done, and we are going to persist. Say persist. I'm going to tell y'all a secret. November 2020, if every person we want gets the job we've asked them for, it will not fix America. Politicians aren't magic. Voting isn't magic. Persistence requires that we recognize the fight is never over. The fight's not about the last bell ringing. The fight's about the action. The fight's about keeping your fist up, not just to punch something, but to raise our fist in recognition of something. We have to fight every day. We have to persist because poverty persists, because injustice persists, because racism is real, xenophobia is real, bigotry is real. Homophobia didn't go away because same-sex marriage became legal in the United States. We know that the isms that are the original sin of America will persist, but we fight and we win when we persist as well. Say persist. When we recognize that it's not just about resistance, it's about persistence. Resistance is saying, I'm not going to let you go any further, but persistence is about pushing the line farther and farther away. Because 2020 isn't going to be enough. 2022 isn't going to be enough. 2024, 2026, 2028. We will keep fighting as long as there is a fight to be had. Because for as long as power is out there, there are going to be those who try to wrest it from us. But if we plan, if we pursue, if we persist, the power will be ours. Thank you so much.
Perfect message. Wow.